Hi, welcome to Leaving the Lies and Speaking the Truth. Today, our guest is Brandon Salo. He is a sociologist. Thank you, Brandon, for joining us today.
That's my pleasure to be here.
How's everything going? I know that you're in Spain, right?
That's correct. Yep.
How's the weather there?
Everything's going well. The weather's pretty warm, probably about the same as what it would be in Texas, but it's nice.
Gotcha. Okay, all right. I would like to let everybody know that we do have a Facebook group called Leaving the Lies and Speaking the Truth. It is concerning cults and people that may still be in cults. Melody and I started this because we were in the House of Yahweh and we're trying to help people get out of there. We also have a YouTube page that we would like for you to like, share, and subscribe to called Leaving the Lies and Speaking to the Truth. As I was saying, we are speaking to Brandon today, who is a sociologist. Did I say that correctly?
That's correct, yes.
What does that mean? What does sociologist mean, Brandon?
Well, in a very basic context, sociology is the study of groups. Psychology is the study of individuals. And all of that, does rely on the foundations of biology, chemistry, and physics. But essentially, what makes sociology and psychology quantitative sciences is that we use statistic analysis, and we also study trends. That's basically what it is essentially studying trends. As I mentioned before, there's a linguistical aspect behind various groups, whether it's a university or, in our case, a doomsday cult. So.
All right, Melody?
Okay. As a sociologist, could you explain the sociological construction of language and how exactly it relates to cults?
Well, this concept, this sociological construct of language, is a very complex topic. It's a very complex concept. It's basically using patterns of language to influence behavior. To get started on a very basic example, one example that I really like is that when a mother talks to her child, let's just say, a mother, their mother is worried about the child misbehaving. And so a mother could take the approach where she says to the child, don't you get into trouble. When you go out of the house, don't you get into trouble. Or she could take the approach as, if you're going out, just know that we trust you and we trust that you're going to make the right choices that's going to be the best for you and the best for our family. So on that context, we're, in the first example, we're bringing up this concept of trouble. And, you're putting it right in their frontal cortex. So when a child, or anybody is thinking of what they're not supposed to do, we often just go ahead and do that. Whether it's something as simple as, somebody walks into the room when you're getting changed and you say, don't look. And then the first reaction is to turn over and look. Somebody says well, I'm going to go out tonight and have a good time, but I'm not going to drink so much, for example.
I'm drinking. When I say that, I'm drinking. I'll say it.
Yeah. So this is something that's really common. And, this construct of language is also something that we could use in our own, individual lives, as opposed to saying I always make this mistake. We could use positive language as to, I'm learning how not to do this action. In terms of the House of Yahweh, it gets pretty complex. For example, as a group, the House of Yahweh has their own vocabulary. For example, there's a lot of words that we don't say, that we didn't say. Such as happy or good, and we would always be scolded or chastised if we use these words in the beginning of being introduced to the House of Yahweh. So if we ever said any of these words, people would say, "Oh, you can't say that. That's the name of a god." And so quickly, if we all remember, quickly we managed to get all of these words out of our vocabulary. So that's another part of this as well. So that way one group can distinguish themselves from another group based on the language that they use.
Would you also say that it's used as a control method?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Biblically, one thing that I learned when studying this concept, I'm pretty sure it goes like this. Anybody who's watching this and they want to pick apart the details, please don't hold me accountable to any academic
Right.
literature out there. So feel free to take this all with a grain of salt. But when it comes to a word like woman, for example, the way that I understand this comes from the ancient Aramaic, and it means beneath. And so, as we know, as they taught us in the book of Genesis, that God created man first, and then he didn't do such a good job, so he took a rib and made a woman. And so, the whole premise of the Bible is kind of, structured in that context to have women as a counterpart to men, where they have no authority, no sense of freedom, whatsoever. So I think that's like a really good starting point to just see how it works in our psychology. Knowing that woe man means beneath man, and essentially less than man.
Huh.
So is that, I mean, I know just a little bit about this from a podcast that I listen to called Mind Shift, which is about
Hmm.
forming a new identity post religion. And, but he refers a lot to a writings by Robert J. Lifton. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. And one of the
Okay.
things he wrote a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. It's the study of brainwashing in China, actually, and it covers the 8 criteria of thought reform. And do you think that the way that the House of Yahweh uses language is similar to the I think it's pronounced milieu control, which is one of the 8 criteria that Robert Lifton lists in his book?
Um, I can't speak, in particular about this book. Um,
Okay.
but more specifically in terms of brainwashing, social conditioning requires a lot of repetitive exposure to any form of stimulus, or, well, I guess to a specific form of stimulus in this case, in terms of getting people to believe a certain thing. Um, and what I noticed in the House of Yahweh was that there was a lot of reasoning that was circular. It was essentially like a wheel,
Right.
that you start out on the wheel, but the wheel was relatively large and relatively complex. But by the time you've exhausted all of the reasons and the logic, um, to justify their original claims, you're back at the original claim. But for example, like a really short form of circular logic is, well, we have to listen to the Bible. We have to study the Bible and do what the Bible says, because it's the Word of God, and God wrote the Bible. Well, how do you know that? Well, because it says it right here. It says it right in the Bible that God wrote the Bible. So in terms of, a leader in any cult saying, I'm the last day's witness, or I'm the prophet, this is what it says right here. And so eventually it just boils down on faith. And then at this point, after many, many years of being inside of a group like this, you close your brain off to real logic and real reasoning. And then it becomes much easier to manipulate the individual,
Right.
especially
Right.
in the group circumstance, because when you have 2 or 3 people in any size group, it's much easier to then move the rest of the group.
Right. Right. Because then you have almost like a herd mentality, somewhat,
Exactly.
where
Yeah.
you don't want to be the one person not conforming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not, conformity is a significant component in this case. However, people invest their physical, their financial, and their emotional lives, and psychological lives into any cult. You know,
Right.
when you have to pay tithes, when you have to travel, people dedicate so much. So what's often overlooked is that so many years of dedicating your finances and distancing yourself from your family and friends who aren't a part of the group, it gets to the point where, oh, I've invested so much now. Why should I give up?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of them are to the point where they're so financially invested, the ones especially that live there, then almost feel trapped. Like, I financially can't even afford to get out of here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I just want to add this for those, because I will tell you, Brandon, people inside the House of Yahweh are watching us, and they have made, you know, sad faces, angry faces, whatever. I would just like to say real quick that you were in the House of Yahweh as a child.
Yes. Yeah, I entered the House of Yahweh when I was about 6 years old.
Okay, and you went on to get a degree, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I went to Northern Michigan University.
Okay, and you now have this profession. So there is hope. There is another world outside of what you are living in right now. Do you,
Absolutely. My life since I left, and understand that I had to give up my relationship with my father. The relationship that I had within the cult. I had to give up the relationship with my father and with my stepmother. It was a wonderful lady in my life. She wasn't my biological mother, but she was an incredible lady in my life. And since I left, it's been a constant, I would say, blossoming of transformation, and learning how to, live a life of, beauty and compassion, and learning a new type of, independent faith that kind of like accepts everybody, and everything more or less.
that's
Um,
awesome. That's awesome.
yeah,
That gives great hope to those that may be listening and wondering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, there's always hope. It's a really really difficult decision to make. But when
Absolutely.
a metaphor in life is that, and I relate this to the leaders of all cults and all groups who manipulate people and who make people's lives very difficult. But the metaphor that I think of is, like the moment we're born, you could kind of look at it like we're being thrown off of a cliff, and we cannot see the bottom. We're just, where we're headed. All we know is that we're traveling through the air, through the clouds at terminal velocity, and it's terrifying because we know that one day we're going to hit that bottom and we're going to die. And what I find in society, regardless if it's a cult or a very material society, is that we often look around ourselves as we're falling, and we find something and we hold on to it. We find something that's falling next to us and we hold on to it, and we try to forget that that's also falling and not offering us any kind of protection.
Wow.
Um, and and so, like no matter what, we're all going to go there someday. 200 years ago, anybody who lived is now dead, and that's just how it is. Um, and so we use especially today in Western society, we use the fear of death as something to really control people. Whether it's how much dedication you can give to a group, or a doctrine, or how many material possessions you can own, or businesses, or whatever. We put so much meaning on this, thinking that it's going to actually mean something when we die, as opposed to relationships and the quality of relationships that we have with other people. Because this is probably the number one thing that people talk about before they die, is the most special thing to them in their lives has been the quality of the relationships that they've had. Um,
Absolutely.
I imagine a lot of people now, especially having gone through likely some type of like quarantine or lockdown, have understood this. And just one other metaphor to parallel this one is that, um, instead of looking at life as like being thrown off a cliff, headed towards a certain demise, you could look at it as going down a river. And, you know, as soon as people stop trying to swim against the current and then just kind of go with things, life kind of eases up quite a bit, and self-honesty. I like you could say like the cornerstones or the pillars to my spirituality, which is it's my spirituality. It's not necessarily something for anybody else, but like the pillars here just make a lot of sense, and they're all kind of the same thing. Honesty, compassion, and acceptance. They're all kind of the same thing. So if anybody explores these concepts or exhausts these concepts, internally, and it's something that they practice all the time, they'll start to get that a lot of other things just don't really matter. And when they understand that, just a lot of things open up in their life and just become a lot easier.
Understandable. Yes, so, I like those metaphors. Go ahead, Mel. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, good. Did growing up in a cult influence your decision to study sociology, and if so, how?
That's kind of an interesting question. Partly, yes. Growing up in such an extreme, controlling environment mostly perpetuated me to be a jazz musician. And as I studied music in university, I found that there were a lot of similarities of fundamentalism in the department that I was in. And then I decided to change and then study sociology. I'm not saying that the entire department was like this, but there was enough of it there to make me change my mind. And that was after a couple years of being in university. And another thing was that when I was a freshman in university, I was very open to talk about my experiences. And so I told my freshman introduction sociology class about my experience in this cult, and I was open to questions, but of course, perhaps young freshmen aren't so inclined to ask questions. And so after that, and this goes back a little bit to what you were saying, Ariel, is that the professor said, "Brandon, do you know what you have over all of these students in this room?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You were in an enclosed environment that you couldn't see out of. And eventually you allowed yourself to step out. And now you have the ability to see inside that group, along with the current, group that you're in at this moment." And then he asked, "Do you know what your goal is?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, to keep stepping out." And so essentially, he was kind of propelling me on my my constant journey of transformation. And the only, I guess, visual metaphor I could give for that would be a lotus flower.
Yes, that's amazing that you were able to have a mentor like that.
That is.
I've had a lot of mentors. There comes a point where everything is your mentor.
1,000% I'm with you, Brandon. 1,000%. You can learn from everything.
As a sociologist, how do you feel that being involved in a cult affects the mind of a child?
Well, again, this is a very, very large and broad topic. Going back to what I said earlier about closing off the mind to logical reasoning, I guess to be more specific and more current with the words, and instead of saying logical reasoning, I guess we could kind of use the concept of gaslighting, and so because it's kind of like the same thing. The mind wants to go somewhere because logical reasoning is logical reasoning. It's finite based on our physical world and how our physical world functions around us. So when you start telling a mind, like it doesn't work that way, and you just have to believe that it does. What I believe, and I'm not a neurologist, but what I believe is that the neurons and the connections in the brain that would normally be firing don't fire. And so, if that's happening to a child, then you're inhibiting the development of a child. You can teach a child a lot. And there's a lot of controversy in how much to teach children because of if they learn too much, how are they going to be able to socialize with children their age? But it's really easy to keep children um, um, from learning things more than anything else.
Right.
And there was a case. I believe it was there's been a few cases in psychological and sociological history where children have been raised by animals or have been kept in a closet, and so if there are certain things that don't happen regarding like language, and I'm sure other aspects, other forms of intelligence, if they're not learned at a certain age, we risk never allowing that opportunity to happen with that child.
Right.
And Brandon, that is true. I I have my early childhood education degree, and it is absolutely truth. A child gets what they are all about, their truth, their love, all of that from the age of 0 to the age of 6. Their brain is formed in how and you can change the behaviors, but it's harder to do. So if you don't teach a child, if you don't ever use this arm, ever use it, and it just lays there, then it becomes unable to it just dies, it withers away. Yeah. So I am in 1000% agreement in what you are saying.
Yeah, and that arm analogy, that's a really good point to bring up. I went through an injury where I broke both of the bottom bones in my leg, and I'm currently actually still retraining those muscles. So I would say that that if somebody were worried about this, within themselves or within their children, that I would think that there's a lot of opportunity to regenerate that and then even go further. Willpower is an incredible thing. It's an incredible thing. And when we learn how to harness that, we can accomplish things that will surprise anybody.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. What aspect of the House of Yahweh teachings do you think is the most destructive overall?
And I'm so excited for this question. When I saw this question, I was like, I don't care about any other question. I'm so excited to hear your point of view, because I got to tell you, Brandon, I remember, I think I remember your dad, Dale, correct? But I could not remember you to save my life. And so I immediately asked Melody, immediately began texting, who was this kid? Why don't I know him? I'm so excited to see this, because you were a child and then you grew up in it and then you moved on with your life. I'm going to let you talk now, Brandon. I'm just super excited.
Well, can you ask that question again?
What aspect of the House of Yahweh teachings do you think is the most destructive?
Yeah, so the aspect of the teachings. Well, within the House of Yahweh, the aspect of the teachings, I would say, is that under no conditions is the leader wrong.
Right.
Because nothing can be questioned, and that if there isn't any reasoning to justify it, you just have to agree or have faith. And that opens the door for a tremendous amount of corruption under any circumstance, under any group or any system.
Right.
When nothing can be questioned, then there ultimately becomes free reign for tyranny. And this is the demise of civilization eventually. And this is why sociologists, or you could say even biological sociologists, and I'll talk about that here, would refer to these groups as cults. And this relates to the tyranny, because in biological sociology, we say that a cult, and in modern terms, a cult is a group that extracts so many resources from the followers that eventually it just implodes on itself, right? So in this context, we wouldn't say that Christianity, Islam, Judaism would be a cult, because they've lasted for so long. Now, certainly they've had a lot of grievances with other groups, such as the Crusades, but they haven't extracted so many resources from the individual followers within the groups for it to collapse. Now, something like Jim Jones, collapsed on itself. Something like Scientology is probably headed in that direction. Something like the House of Yahweh, well, if from when I got into it around 1991, 1992, it seemed like a slightly unusual place, but everybody was nice and happy. And then the evolution until I left in 2004, the amount of control that was implemented and accepted within the group was quite the contrast, I should say. And from what I've heard since then, 16 years later, is that it's gotten much worse. So I would certainly assume, that they're nearing this breaking point of things falling apart. So.
So what was it like integrating back into society, and what are some of the things that you've done to cope with the difficulty of that adjustment?
Real quick to interrupt, Mel, we're 25 minutes in.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Adjusting back to normal society. Well, I was never a normal child, period. Even in the cult. There were certainly a lot of things regarding social interaction that I really didn't learn. Thankfully, I've always had the personality to put myself out there and not to be afraid of looking like an idiot. So I kind of just did that, and and I did that I would put myself out there to learn certain things, and it certainly just took a while. It's really hard to articulate exactly what these things were, but society is constantly changing as it is, and when you're trying to learn how to interact with people in a social setting, and you don't have all of those social skills, it requires a lot of observation. I would say, that I suffered a lot with anxiety, and this is probably like the biggest thing. Anxiety and depression was something that I really struggled with for many years, and I've had panic attacks in the past and whatnot.
We can relate.
And I would say that, when you start to self-reflect, and when you start on this journey of introspection and being honest with yourself, you open a lot of doors, and that can be very stimulating in a very new way, which can cause a sensation of anxiety because you're just aware of a lot of things, and you can become hyper aware. But how I dealt with that and getting over that was essentially through endless introspection, endless questions of asking myself, why do I think this way? Why do I behave this way? Finding the patterns that I am demonstrating in my behavior. First, discovering these patterns, and then finding when these patterns start, and then stopping them before they start in order to change the patterns, whatever they might be, whether it's a verbal pattern, a physical pattern, anything like that. And so over time, I've really been able to change, my behavior, and be very comfortable essentially in any circumstance. And the truth is that if you are able to grow up and survive in such an extreme group and make the decision to leave independently, just with the clothes on your back, you will be able to survive in any situation. And the reality is in this life is we don't really starve to death in this day and age, we don't have to worry about people coming into our village and attacking us. So, despite what the news says, this day and age, we are, we have it quite easy compared to what we did before. But being able to take that first initial step is the notion that you will be able to take many steps in life to lead you to places that you never would have guessed you would have arrived. and would have been able to be successful at.
Absolutely. And I would like to add that most people that are in there believe or think or are conditioned to believe and think that there aren't people out there willing to help them. And in most cases, not only is their family out there willing to help them, there are other people who may not even know them that would be willing to help them.
Yes.
Because,
Well, the truth is that people around the world, everywhere, humans are humans. And I'm going to talk about one divisive teaching that all religions tend to promote. I've been to roughly 30 countries in this on this planet, and people generally tend to be people, and people don't really like to suffer. Now, in many Western religions, we have this idea that people are inherently evil, right?
It's
Well,
true.
if this is true, then we can't even trust ourselves in believing that. So if we accept this as being true, we are very confused.
right.
We can't, by logic, we can't believe that. So, you know, I think that overall, generally, people are just really good. People don't want to be manipulated, or taken advantage of, so they tend to stay away from other people, and we can be a little bit selfish. But overall, people just, want to be nice. It feels good to be nice to other people. It feels good to be a stranger to people. I mean, it
Absolutely.
feels good to be nice to strangers and to help strangers out in difficult circumstances. And I've been in difficult circumstances, all around the world, here and there. Nothing extreme, thankfully. However, there's always somebody willing to help you out, whether it's in a rich country or a poor country. So it's
I absolutely agree with that.
I'm just going to let you guys know. I just got a little notification from Zoom saying that they have eliminated our 40-minute time limit. So if we go a little over, it's not going to be a big deal. So I'm thinking I'm just going to
cool.
wrap up some of these more of these questions because I was thinking we were going to have to divide it into two, but I think we're going to be okay. So my next question is, as a child, how do you think your experience differed from adults that go in? And in terms of the long-term effects of someone joining as an adult versus the long-term effects of someone joining as a child.
Well, the child gets taken in by the adults.
Right.
The adults, from my observations, are generally searching for an answer, to a very, very complex question. Ultimately, what is the meaning of all of this?
Right.
And, or, what is the meaning of all of this? How can I be a part of it? And how can I promote, good in the world? Because most people in the House of Yahweh are they just want to do good things. They want there to be peace, you
Right.
know, and that's why they latch onto these, to anything that has peace in the label.
And I agree
Um,
with what you're saying, Brandon. Absolutely. Let's just say there's 100 people, and there's thousands of people in there now. But if it's hundreds an easy number. 100 people in the House of Yahweh. 10 of them are the controlling, manipulative people. The other
yep.
90 are people that are just searching for what they consider to be the truth to life, the truth to peace and to happiness and goodwill.
Mm,
1000%
yep.
agree with you saying that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I would also add, among the small number of people that, are in a position of power, regardless of whatever reason why they might try to maintain that position, I argue that that's out of fear, and it's out of fear of not making the most of this life. And, perhaps there's this notion that the more control and power that I can have, that's how I'm getting the most out of this life. So I would argue that, that the people who have significant positions of power in this on this planet, period, not only within this cult, are probably the most afraid people on this planet, the people that suffer the most from fear.
Huh. I had never thought of it that way. I'm glad that you said that.
That is
It
very
brings it
interesting.
into a whole different perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, with children being brought in by their parents, they just kind of go along with things, and then in the end, they either stay or they leave. And in most cults, it's usually the young men that kind of get pushed out one way or another, And the young girls are usually the ones that they really try to keep in there, especially when there's practicing of polygamy and so forth.
That actually
So
leads to my next question, which is what actually ultimately made you decide to leave the House of Yahweh?
yeah, well, it was when an elder told me that no matter what the overseer says goes, like under no conditions is he capable of sinning.
Mm.
That's where I
How old
just
were you,
calmly.
Brandon?
I was 18.
Oh, okay.
I was 18. Yeah, yeah. This was the feast of Passover, and so I just looked at him and I said, well, very calmly, I said, well, thank you for telling me that. That's I really needed to hear that. And so I kind of just sat there by myself for the rest of the feast, and knowing that I was never going to come back. Um, that was the breaking point ultimately. For some of my friends, there were people that came there, and like within a short period of time they became elders, and then they told my friend, well, maybe you're not called because you're committing these sins, and so forth, and they got really frustrated.
Uh oh, got a little lag.
That just as long as you pay your tithes, everything is fine. You just have to do that. So let me know if my connection gets bad. I just got a notification saying it was unstable.
We had a little glitch in your audio for a minute, but it came back pretty quick. So
Okay.
I'm going to move on to my next question. I know, or I've heard that there is some suspicion around your father's death. If you don't want to talk about that, that's fine. But would you mind talking
I don't
about
want to get into
a
too
little bit of
much
that?
speculation.
Okay.
I just want to say that the situation was highly suspicious. Mm, when you look at statistically how suicides happen, um, there's
Okay, so
usually
wait, hold on
signs.
just a minute, Brandon. They're saying that your father committed suicide?
Yes,
Okay.
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So when you have a suicide, there's trends that happen across the board. There's women tend to commit suicide in a certain way, men tend to commit suicide in a certain way. It tends to be at certain times. It tends to be at certain locations in relation to their personal life. Um, and when you have a situation where there's a suspected suicide in the middle of and like before lunchtime, let's say before noon, where there's two people on a job site. One person leaves the job site for, um, say, an hour, and he comes back, and that happened. It was a very bizarre circumstance, and for there to not be any, what am I saying? Um, well, he didn't have his wallet on him. He didn't have his phone on him. He didn't have his keys. And then when when he was discovered, the police weren't called immediately, and there was a lot of phone calls being made in order to determine when they should call the police.
Mm.
And when I spoke to the police, I asked them if they asked them if the police were the first people that they called, and he said that he didn't think about asking that. And so I explained to them who were there and who were doing their own investigations to check for pulses and so forth. And um, and there was no follow up in terms of questioning with these individuals after they had new information. It was put in the police report, however. Um, so that was very, unusual in any circumstance.
Right. Well, it would seem like certainly it appears to be a red flag of some sort.
Yeah, and so that happened, and there was like a little document that I found that looked like a life insurance policy had been opened up a couple weeks before that happened, and there was just there's no information on it. All of his liquid assets from his pension, where he worked for about 30 years at an iron ore mine, all of that went to the House of Yahweh.
Wow.
Now, One other, unusual aspect, because I did go to public schools, and a lot of children in the House of Yahweh don't go to public schools, but I did go to public schools, partly because my biological mother was never in it. My biological mother suffered tremendously from psychological disorders, and 2 years after my father died, my mother committed suicide. Now,
Wow.
this was what we would call a textbook suicide, and she had taken a lot of medication, and she had done what is textbook. She put a lot of makeup on to look really pretty. She got in bed and she went to sleep, and she never woke up. And any sociologist, anybody who understands suicides would look at that and they'd just say, yeah, that's probably a absolute no questions asked a suicide. And um, I think we waited like 6 weeks before there was a determination on how she actually died, due to the significant investigation of the police in Wisconsin. So essentially within, within hours, it seemed, after my father's death, it was just labeled right away what it
Wow.
was. So there was a big difference in how a situation like this would be handled in Callahan County or Baird County versus versus in Wisconsin. So
That actually kind of leads into my next question, but before I go there, I just want to say how sorry I am to hear that you've lost both your parents. That is I didn't know that, so I'm just
yeah,
hearing that
well,
for
I
the
mean,
first time.
I would never, I wouldn't wish the pain of this, on my worst enemy, honestly.
Yeah, that on top of dealing with all the other stuff with, dealing with the coming out of the House of Yahweh and all of that. That's a lot for anybody to handle. Um,
It certainly is.
so my next question that I said that kind of leads into are, what are your thoughts or opinions on the idea of a House of Yahweh elder becoming a sheriff in Callahan County, the county where the main branch of the cult is located?
Yeah, so I've heard, I've heard the potentiality of this situation, and this is what all, groups would like to do. If you, I mean, it's like cults, like whether it's like Mormonisms. I mean, this essentially in terms of, evolving the cult, evolving your power. This is ultimately like the next step, and it was, could have been a plan from the beginning, like that's what they're going to try to do. Um, it might be easy because you have a large voting population where you can just say, we're just gonna vote for you because that's that.
Right.
Um, I mean, when we look at things that are completely unjust and completely inappropriate, there's a difference between that and what's legal or illegal. Because what's
Right.
legal or illegal involves a lot of bureaucracy. And when it comes to investigations, from, like, for example, let's say the FBI, they need hard evidence, and hard evidence is, like physical documentation,
Right.
or at the very least, consistent footage or recordings of certain situations. But even then, it's not necessarily solid evidence. Eyewitness testimony is more often than not false. It is often very, very false. But the legal system does try to find some kind of middle ground. But when you have a leader in this group trying to gain a position of power within that community, um, to then gain more power and more freedom within this group, um, it's again, it's another huge red flag. But I don't really think that, unfortunately, I don't think that there's really much of a way to really work against it, unless there's enough people that disagree with it as opposed to people who do agree with it. So it's a numbers game, essentially.
Absolutely. And part of it is that a lot of the people who can see the issues or the potential problems with it don't even live in that county and can't vote, like you or me or Autumn. We
Yeah.
don't live there. So we don't have a say in that because we aren't
Mhm.
part of that community anymore. So that's the and I actually said something very similar about them saying, well, why don't they just storm in there and do something about it? Well, the problem is they can't just do that based on, like you said, the thing about eyewitness testimony is that we were all in the House of Yahweh, but we all have a very different perspective. We all had a unique experience there. And those words or those stories might connect and might, we might confirm some of each other's experiences in that, but it doesn't necessarily give the law a legal grounds to stand on to say, oh, well, 10 people said this, so, we can do this. That's not the way the law, unfortunately, works.
Right.
And also, the House of Yahweh, I'm sorry, Brandon.
That's okay.
The certain elders, Yisrael, they hold a potential important key here. I mean, if, let's just say the FBI, CIA, whoever you want, DEA were to go in, and you have all of these people inside, thousands of people inside, they very much risk the fact of another Waco and killing, hundreds, even 1,000 people, and children who are women, even some men that are just innocent bystanders thinking that they have done the right thing. So it's just all around a tricky situation.
Well, there is that political dynamic where they have to be careful of, presenting something to the world that makes, their system look bad, like in Waco or in Ruby Ridge, or whatever. And this, like with what happened in Waco, because of all the, firepower that they had, this was, probably one of the big reasons why they were so crucial on no firearms, in the House of Yahweh. That was like the one thing that they knew could end their operation. Whereas, it's just really complicated. I mean, you are saying thousands of people, and that is a bit of a surprise. So has the group grown quite a bit in the past few years?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Roughly how many people are in the group?
I find that subjective, just because I think if you ask them, you're going to get an inflated number. That is just my opinion, because I think they want it to look
sense.
Like more people are joining. So I've questioned some of their numbers. I mean, Autumn, when did you leave compared to when Brandon left?
Well, when I left in 99.
Oh, okay, you left before Brandon then.
Yeah, October of 99. I couldn't take it anymore. I thought if Y2K was coming, boy, I was going to enjoy my last few months. I was done. I was finished. I wasn't doing it no more. If I was going out, I was going out with the bang. But when I left, once everybody had gathered together for the actual feast, Tabernacles, Passover, Pentecost, the number at the time, the count, was well over 1,200.
Yeah, I remember it being around like 1,400 people. But I thought the numbers had dropped quite a bit, because if it were the same number now, I would be surprised.
Really?
Yeah, I would. I would. I would believe it if that ended up being the case. But
Right.
With what Melody was saying in terms of the subjectivity and the numbers and wishing and wanting to believe that there are a lot of other people there, going through the same thing as you, then.
Well, and I tend to think that I tend to believe, and this is just my personal belief, that I find that it would be harder for them, or believe it would be harder for them to get members because their beliefs have become more extreme over time. Whereas when we were all there, it's grown into something different than when we were there. And I think it would be harder for new people to come in and accept that much extremism.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Absolutely.
I agree with you. However, I know for a fact, and I will not say any names, but I know for a fact somebody who had left before me, her and her husband are going back, rejoining the House of Yahweh again.
Wow.
And I think a lot of it, though, to be just real honest with both of y'all, I think a lot of it has to do with what's going on right now with the corona, with it being called a pandemic, with China, with politics, with Save the Children, with all of that. I think people are just scared. So I can't speak for you two, but when Corona first happened and it was a pandemic and everything was taking place and all this stuff was going down, after that long went, did I leave? Should I have stayed? Am I going to die? But then again, for that split second, I had that thought. And then I thought, you know what? Even if I left and that's the place that it's going to be, I'm not going to say what I really thought in my head because nobody knows. And Brandon, you can probably figure it out. But I thought to myself, well, I'm going down in a blaze of glory.
Doing what we truly believe is right is the only way to live our lives. And
right.
I believed it was right for me, to quote unquote burn in the lake of fire, being bound hand and foot and thrown off the sea of glass, and because I just really disagreed with everything when I left, to the point where I just said, you know what, I don't even care if it's right or wrong. If it's the truth or not the truth. I just disagree with it so much that I'm just going to leave, and I'm going to leave quietly, and that's going to be that.
That's kind of where I was too. I was kind of like, well, if this is heaven and I'm going to burn in hell, then I guess I'm just going to burn in hell because I can't live in this heaven.
I think that's the way it has to be.
Yeah.
For somebody deciding to leave.
Absolutely.
Because it's, if that's not the case, then I think it's the probability of going back is that
much higher.
Nobody knows when or how we're going to die, and but we need to accept the fact that we will. And when you accept that and acknowledge that, and then live life in a way that just brings joy into your life, just just having daily actions and whatever, just that, doing anything that just brings joy into your life. And I don't mean eating a lot of sugar or drinking a lot of alcohol or these things. I'm not saying don't do those things, but that's not really
attacked by that, Brandon.
Sometimes bringing joy into our life is saying a difficult truth to somebody where it's painful, and then later on something more beautiful happens, and that's really what I'm referring to. So if I'm not surprised that a small number of people might have decided to go back given the circumstance. Me personally, when I saw this happening, it's just like, well, looking at biology and science and in nature, these things happen. Did it happen as a result of this? Like, I don't know. Is one of the million conspiracies out there the right one? I don't really care. In the end, it's just like, well, I mean, people get sick, and we have good ideas of what to do not to get sick. Exercise, eat healthy, have proper vitamins and minerals, and that's about all we can do. Period. Right. Anything can happen to any of us. We drive cars every day. It's the most dangerous thing we do on this planet. We don't think about it, right? A lot of people die from this virus, and there's we're terrified from it. We're terrified from it because we're constantly being told a specific message. And we need to be concerned and careful with our health and with our safety. But at the same time, inviting fear into our lives, regardless of where it's from, we need to be really, really, really careful with that. And it's more important to just be careful in life than it is to be afraid of anything.
Well, and especially for, anybody in general, but certainly for us who are more prone to that, who've been kind of conditioned to react in a fearful way. Because I did the most tight quarantine that probably anybody did. I was locked in my house and I didn't come out. I was scared.
And I was very concerned about it as well. I've been to 3 separate countries during this pandemic. And I also went to the emergency room and stayed in the hospital for 10 days during this pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And some people in my life were incredibly close to me, who I knew were going to have to take care of me for a period of time after being in the hospital. They were at high risk. So I was very, very concerned, and I really had no idea, what was going to happen and how this was actually going to turn out. So I prepared, and we are like the old school preppers, the preppers long before it was in fashion. because that's what we were told, the end times. If you spend all your money on food storage, it's going to be hard for you to leave and spend your money on something else.
That's true.
It's funny you say that, Brandon, because my husband, Philip, when this all came down, Philip said, we had a family meeting, Philip said, we're in the best hands possible. Your mama's been preparing this for a life. We got this down packed.
Yeah.
And I had the menus, how to put the food in, what kind of food, what we could cook. Yeah.
Well, I mean, being prepared for any kind of, situation like this is a good idea. There are a lot of, beneficial things that we did learn in the cult, and that's what makes it a bit confusing and difficult for people, is because when you put that mixture of righteousness and evil, we'll use that metaphor, when you put that into somebody, we're going to look at this as like things that are actually beneficial and things that really aren't so beneficial, to the individual. It becomes really, it can be confusing to figure out what is, really beneficial for me and what's not beneficial for me. Having a deep pantry on hand all the time that you can kind of cycle through, that's a good idea. Being overly terrified about things isn't really good, because it takes away from the quality of your life.
Right. Absolutely.
And
absolutely. Brandon, let me just say that. How old are you, Brandon?
I'm 34.
Let me tell you, you are an absolutely brilliant, well-spoken, well-mannered young man.
Those are very
and I am
words.
so sorry. I lost both of my parents and they were in the house. I got to actually spend a little bit of life with them, though. I'm so sorry that you had to go through this. And I'm just going to say, for one parent who has older children, your mama and daddy would be so pleased and so amazed and bragging of the young man that you are.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're just absolutely just a very wise, beyond your years young man, and I just love the peace that you have around you, because your story could have gone such a different way.
Yeah, it certainly could have. Honestly, I think in just about all forms of beauty that we see in this world, it does often come from hardship. And when I talk about joy, there's that simple question: do you want joy in your life or not? And personally, I believe that if somebody just says like no, they don't, or at least that's what the overall truth ends up being. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just that when you do live your life in a certain way where you have a lot of joy throughout every day, life is just so much more fulfilling.
Yes.
And
yes.
Had I not gone through some of these horrifyingly difficult experiences in life, I wouldn't have been able to to be the person that I am today.
And for you to say that at the age of 34, I don't think you realize it. And I can see in your face, you're like, listen, lady, I need you to stop saying this to me. I'm embarrassed. But I'm just going to tell you, it's a wonderful thing to see, especially in this day and age, especially. And I mean, I love talking to you.
And us knowing too where he came from and
right.
And what he experienced and how you had to overcome a lot to be where you are.
Yes.
And it is very impressive. Very impressive.
Because Melody and I were both 15 when we joined, and it doesn't matter how old I was, but I was not, I did not, whatever, it doesn't matter. Melody, you can give your age because we left at separate times. But just don't nobody do no math. But I just thank you for speaking to us, Brandon. I mean, you really are a story of hope, and I hope that anybody that is watching this that is still in the house know that this young man started in the house, and look at him today and the love and the positivity and just his life. You're in Spain, correct?
Yeah, at the moment I'm in Spain.
You just got back from Madrid?
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, my hat's off to you and anybody that may be listening to this. If he is not proof that there is life out there, like Reba McEntire's song, I mean, I don't know what proof is. He is living proof of the positivity and compassion and love that he has received, that he gives, and that will continue in his life. And thank you so much, Brandon, for taking the time to speak to us today. If anybody has any questions, comments, or concern, please remember all things are positive. We keep everything in positive. We are about embracing and helping those that may want to get out, whether it's the House of Yahweh or any other religious experience that you are in. We are here to help. This will be on the Facebook group page, Leaving the Lies, Speaking the Truth. And we will also have it on a YouTube page, Leaving the Lies, Speaking the Truth. We ask that you like, share, and subscribe for more interviews. And if you do have any questions, please comment. Brandon, would you mind answering any questions they may have in the comments?
Yeah, I can try to do that when I get around to it.
That's
feel
fine.
free to send me a message and I can take a look at that.
Okay. No time constraints. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We so appreciate your time today.
It's my pleasure. I do have a lot of hope for everybody, and again, it's you have to do in life, period, what you believe is right, and that is always changing, and it's always okay to just say, I thought that I wanted to do that, but now I want to do this. It's okay to do that.
Absolutely. That's a good final message.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Have a
Thank you.
Day, Brandon.
Thank you.
You.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.